Good morning, everybody. I hope you are well. Welcome to this section on JS2 week 3. In this section, we're going to see how we can use JavaScript to manipulate web pages. So before we get into any of that, I just want to go back to what we looked at weeks and weeks ago towards the beginning of the course. So we started looking at HTML and CSS. And in particular, I'm focused here on HTML. So I've got an index.html page here, and it's worth just reminding ourselves that HTML is the language that we're going to use to describe the structure of our web page. So I've made a very basic example page here with some information about one of my favorite bands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this HTML so that it gets rendered in the browser. So the way I'm going to do this in this particular example is using a tool called Live Server. So this is an extension that you can get in VS Code that you just need to install into VS Code called Live Server. Click on that. When you've installed Live Server into VS Code, that means you can go up here and you can right click, and then you have an option to open this HTML file with Live Server. When you do so, that's going to load HTML into the browser, and we can see it looking like this. So I have Radiohead fan page, albums, and a few albums for that particular band. So this is something that's just recapping what we've seen before. Using Live Server to render some HTML, we get the content looking like this. Cool. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to manipulate this web page. So server sends us some HTML. The HTML gets rendered by the browser, and then we want to be able to manipulate the web page, maybe change it in some way, add new features or add new content, etc., etc. How are we going to do this? Well, first thing that I want to explain is the idea of something called the DOM. What is the DOM? You're going to hear a lot of talk about the DOM. So first of all, I'm going to kind of go over to an article over here that's discovered earlier, which is going to kind of give you an interesting insight onto HTML versus the DOM. So first of all, it's going to explain a bit about the HTML. So it says here, and this is taken from Chrome's developer notes, when you use a web browser to request a page like example.com, the server returns some HTML. This is something we've already seen, the idea of getting HTML and loading it into the browser. Then goes on to say the browser parses the HTML and creates a tree of objects that looks like this. So you can see from this HTML content, we have a HTML element down here. We've got a head element with a title nested inside over here. We've got a body element with a H1 and a P and a script. So what it's saying is that the browser takes the HTML content and creates a tree of objects. So we just take this. We can take this snippet and summarize this ourselves and put it into diagram. So we've got some initial HTML, which I can have over here. And the article is also saying that the browser passes the HTML to create a tree of objects that looks like this. So this tree of objects that we get over here, this tree of objects is called the DOM. DOM, D-O-M. And DOM is an abbreviation. It stands for Document Object Model. Document Object Model. This may seem a bit mysterious at the moment. Key thing to take away here is that we have initial HTML page, and then we generate a tree of objects that looks like this. Okay? So I guess the first question that we could ask ourselves is, well, how can we see this DOM? So we can draw a diagram that looks like this, with this tree of objects, but can we actually see it somehow? Okay, cool. Well, let's head back over to Chrome and check out web page. So I've got my web page, Radiohead fan page with some albums, etc., etc. So this is going to go back to using Chrome developer tools, something that we saw really early on in the course. So if I right click here and scroll down, I can hit inspect. And then I get a panel that looks something like this with performance tab, network tab, sources tab, console. So this is the interface for Chrome developer tools, which is a super powerful tool that's going to allow us to inspect our web page. In fact, actually what we see here, this thing that you will have seen before, what we're seeing here is the document object model. We're seeing the DOM. This is a tree of objects representing our HTML content. And if I click on this tool here, which says select an element in the page to inspect it, I can hover over things. So I could click on this here, and it's going to take me to the object for that particular element. So this is a super powerful tool, allowing us to inspect the document object model. Awesome. Cool. So let's just pause for a moment there. We've got our initial HTML page. We have a document object model, or a DOM, which is a tree of objects representing our web page. And the next question to ask then really at this point is, why do we need to bother with the DOM? Why do we need to use the DOM? So the reason why we need to use the DOM is because we can use it or we can manipulate it, we should say, using JavaScript. So let's suppose that I wanted to add another list element into this unordered list, or I wanted to change some styling, or just manipulate the content of the page any way I like. I can do that using JavaScript by interacting with the DOM. So to make this a bit clearer, let's head back to VS Code for a second. So I've got my index.html in here. And you should also note that I have in my file system a script.js also located in the same directory. What I can do is I can add a log into here. So log, hello, and welcome to JS2 week 3. Okay, there's my console.log, script.js. So the difference this time is that instead of running this file with Node.js, which you've been doing up to now, what we're going to see, or what we would like to see at this point, is we would like to see script.js executed in the browser. Okay, so we would like to see this JavaScript run by Chrome. Cool. So if that has succeeded, I should be able to head over to the console, and I should be able to see any console output or any logs that I've done appearing in the console here, but I'm not seeing that at the moment. Okay, I just see nothing. So in order to ensure that this JavaScript file is linked up with index.html, I need to add what's called a script element, and I can do that here. So I can write script, I get an emit abbreviation, so I'm going to go down to script and source, and if I hit tab, it's going to auto complete that for me. So I get a script element with a source attribute. If I hover over it, it says this attribute specifies the URI of an external script. This can be used as an alternative to embedding a script directly within a document. There's again a fancy way of saying that this is going to allow us to link our HTML file with a JavaScript file. So in here, I can just put script.js because they're in the same directory. Although you wouldn't really call this script.js. So I'm going to call this something else. I'm going to call it index.js, something like that. Example.js. Let's call it that. Cool. Awesome. Let's see if that has changed anything. Remember that I'm running this HTML file with live server, so any updates in here, once I've saved, they should be reflected in the browser. So heading over here, console, let me just refresh. Cool. I'm seeing hello and welcome to JS2 week 3. So the key thing to note here is the console.log that I wrote in example.js. We're now seeing that being executed in the browser, like so. Awesome. So once we have that, now we can start to think about how we can manipulate the DOM. So we're going to look at that in the next section. So I will see you there very shortly.